Hey everyone. Please support what I do to help keep Greyhawk alive by subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member to get early access to videos, exclusive live chats, quarterly adventure modules, and more. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
So in first edition AD&D, they have a system for psionics, and it's a little puzzling. So we're going to go through it today on Greyhawk Grognard. Now, at the outset, it should be noted that even though Gary wrote the psionic system for D&D, he didn't like it. And as far as I'm aware, there are no real examples of anybody in the Greyhawk campaign who had psionics, which is kind of odd considering the percentages that we're going to talk about. So this is presented more for informational purposes. It's not something that Gary actually later on regretted doing the psionic system, saying that it was more properly suited to something like a sci-fi game than a fantasy game, and I happen to agree with him. We played a little with it in high school, realized just how lame it was, and alternatively lame and overpowered, and we never picked it up again. So it was just one of those things that was there in the books, and we just ignored. So it has its origins in Eldritch Wizardry for the little brown books. There are some very substantive differences between the psionics as presented in here and in AD&D. I'm not going to really go through them, except I might highlight a thing here or there when it's strikingly weird. Although I will say that if you thought psionics was confusing in AD&D, try figuring it out from this damn book. It's up there. In AD&D, psionics is covered in two different places. We have the player's handbook, obviously, and we have the DM's guide, which is where the combat is discussed. That said, here we go. So first of all, just a general overview of psionics. There are two elements to psionics in AD&D. There is psionic combat, and there is the psionic abilities, disciplines, they're called. And it's all covered in Appendix 1 of the DM's guide. And first, the chance of being psionic. When you roll your character, if you have an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma of 16 or higher, you get to roll. Any of those will do it, and you get a few modifiers. I think it's 1.5% per point above 16. And if anybody gets a double zero, 100 on their roll, it's the modifiers. That character is psionic. As opposed to in Eldritch Wizardry, there was a 10% chance of not a 1% chance, a 10% chance of being psionic. So that was a big thing there. Then you have to figure out your psionic ability. Okay, and you roll percentile dice, and you get a bonus for intelligence, wisdom, and charisma above 12. So 1 point for each of those above 12. And if two of them are above 16, the number of bonus points is doubled, and if all three are above 16, the number of points is quadrupled. So you can have the roll, the deep percentile dice, 1 to 100, plus a bonus of anywhere from 1 to 72. So in theory, you could have a character with a psionic strength of 172. That's how the math works. And your psionic ability, this is where it gets complicated, because you've got your psionic strength was that 1 to 172. Your psionic ability is twice that. So it's like, why do you need both of those? And then the psionic ability is divided into attack strength and defense strength. So psionic ability, so your attack strength and your defense strength are both equal to your psionic strength, but they're collectively called psionic ability. I didn't write it. Don't kill the messenger. And you can use those strength points to either attack or defend, or to use your psionic powers, your disciplines, and that's what we're going to get into right now. So the first thing I'm going to go through is the psionic powers, the abilities, um, the disciplines. Sorry, and depending on your die roll, so you roll a d100, you roll percentile dice, and you will get a number of minor and major disciplines. It can be anywhere from one minor and no major, all the way up to four minor and two major. Now, this is a very big difference from the way it was presented in Eldritch Wizardry, where you had a 10% chance per level of when you went up a level of going up. Of gaining a power, and the powers were differentiated by class. So if you were a fighter, you could have powers from this list. If you were a magic user, you could have powers from this list, and a cleric, and so on. So it was very much differentiated by class. And when you got these powers in Eldritch Wizardry, you would lose some of your class abilities. So fighters would start losing the maximum number of followers. Eventually, they would lose points of strength. Magic users would lose spell slots. I mean, there was a real big downside to being psionic in Eldritch Wizardry. That's not here. in AD&D, you just get these powers bolted onto what you already have. Um, and the powers, the disciplines, you roll randomly, and they have things like animal telepathy, cell adjustment, ESP, a lot of levitation, things that you would associate with, classic sci-fi mental abilities, psionic powers, and so forth. There's body weaponry where you can actually attack with your bare hands as if it's a weapon. Uh, 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 Body equilibrium means you can you don't sink if you walk on water or quicksand and things like that. And it goes all the way up to like um, etherealness and so forth. There's some really powerful things that you could get here, and that's where I said at the beginning it could be quite overpowering, because some of these disciplines, if you roll them up randomly, you get a lot of power coming out of that. So, depending on your roles, you could really unbalance a whole campaign with this. There's precognition, which is kind of like a divination thing. There's empathy and uh, detection of good and evil, and so forth. So it's really a whole bag of stuff that you can do with psionics. And there's really, in AD&D anyway, there's really no downside to it, right? There's no to the disciplines. You don't lose any powers. You don't have to pay more experience points. Nothing like that. It's just boom, you get this enormous benefit from the very beginning. So it's quite overpowered in that respect. And I don't blame Gary for not liking it, and I don't blame a lot of DMs for not using it. And now we turn to psionic combat, right? So, and as I said earlier, you get points, right? You've got these total psionic strength, which is your attack plus your defense strength. And you can use those points to use your disciplines, but you also need them to use your psionic abilities. Your attack and defense abilities. And this is all covered in a series of tables in the DM's guide, and I want to take a look at those tables now. Now, when you're doing psionic combat, there's two ways to do it. The first is psionic versus psionic, right? So if your character has psionics and the other character has psionics, it's psionic versus psionic in mental combat. The other way to do it is if you have psionics and the other person doesn't, you can also attack them psionically, but only with one of the different types of psionic attacks. So there are 5 different psionic attacks. There is the psionic blast, the mind thrust, the ego whip, id insinuation, and the psychic rush. Now, these, most of them are pretty much the same, except for the psionic damage that they do. Um, Only one, the psionic blast, can be used against non-psionic creatures. We'll get to that in a sec. And the psychic crush has a chance of just flat out killing the enemy. So it depending on what they have, on what defenses they're using. So psionic combat is run in segments. So you get 6 of these back and forth attacks every round. Um, I'm sorry, 10 of these back and forth attacks every round, because a segment is 6 seconds and a round is 1 minute, so 60. And so, the psionic combat is going to go really, really quickly. And the idea of psionic combat in the first place is to wear down the opponent so he has no more points left. And once you do that, then you're going to go on to the next phase of psionic combat. So if you look at these numbers here, um, and you pick an attack mode and you pick a defense mode, and the intersection of those is how many points the other guy loses. So if I choose, and the effect depends on how much psionic strength you have before the attack begins. So, and that's going to keep going down as the combat goes on, because the whole idea is you're not only spending psionic strength points yourself, you are causing the other guy to lose them as well through these attacks. And eventually one or both of you will get to zero. And when that happens, that's when you go to the next phase. And it's sort of like a rock paper scissors thing. If it's a blind choice, but it's still a choice. So if I choose the ego whip here, and my enemy chooses the thought shield, he's going to lose 3 points of defensive psionic ability. Boom, just like that. And you keep going until, and then if, let's say, he chooses the mind thrust and I've chosen the mind blank, and he's got this many, then I will lose 22 points, depending on his total psionic strength. So depending on and your strength keeps going down as the thing goes, as the combat goes on, and you're just going back and forth until you lose all your points. Now there are two exceptions here. Well, there's one exception here, and that is the Psychic Crush. The Psychic Crush, no matter how many points you start with, if you use it, and depending on what your enemy is using for a defense, you have a percent chance of just killing him. Sorry, all right, he just gets an aneurysm and boom, he's out. If you fail, then you're helpless for a set number of segments or rounds, and then he can just come in and you're the helpless psionic, and um, and that's it. So it's very much of a gamble, because even if you have the most psionic strength that you possibly could, and he chooses exactly the wrong defense, the mind blank, then you only have a 27% chance of killing him. That's right down here, right? So if I'm in this big category down here, um, right, I've got this big category, and this is where the numbers are higher because I have more. I'm starting with more strength, right, 126 and up, and he chooses the mind blank as his defense, and I choose the psychic crush. Then I have a 27% chance of killing him outright. Sounds pretty good, except if I fail, then I'm the one who's helpless. So it's really not all that great a thing to do. So that's phase one of psychic versus psychic combat, right? You just keep battering at each other until one or both of you doesn't have any more defense points. Now, when that happens, let me get this. We move to this table, which is the psionic attack upon defenseless psionic. And once again, how effective your attack is depends on how many psychic attack strength points you have left. So if I've battered him down to nothing and I still have 126 points or more, then I'm going on this part of the table. If I'm down to, let's say, 50, or 40 or whatever, then I'm going to use this part of the table. And you can see the effects are different depending on what his psionic strength total is. And I say the psionic strength total because remember, psionic strength is your attack plus defense. So if he has no more defense points, then he can still have attack points, and it's confusing. So let's say I've got 40 points, so I'm going on this one here. And I choose the ego whip, and he's got, say, or I'm going to choose I'm going to choose the ego whip, and he's got, say, 75 points left, so he's here. So that gives me a 30. And if you look down here, um, the and the result is numbers indicate the number of the defender's psionic attack points lost, right? So first he was losing his defense points, and now he's losing his attack points. Um, if you choose a different thing, so the psychic crush, like we talked about before, now your percentages are a lot bigger, a lot higher. Um, and that means that you have a much higher chance of actually just outright killing him. And then there's some other things in here. Um, uh, you can, and here's the codes. Oops. You can confuse him. You can be dazed. He can be reduced to gibbering idiocy. He can permanently lose one of his attack or defense modes. He goes to sleep. He becomes a robot. He's wounded. There's just stuff like that. So the idea here is that first you've worn down his defenses. Now you're wearing down his attack modes, and you have a shot at doing more damage depending on what attack form you have. And remember, you don't have necessarily all the attack forms. When you first create your character, your psionic character, you have to choose. You roll to see how many of each you get, and you have to choose amongst them to see which ones you get. So it's not like I automatically can choose from all five. You might just have two to choose from. But the more powerful creatures, psionic creatures, are going to have obviously more of these attack and defense modes. So that's what's going on with the psionic versus psionic attack, right? Step one, get rid of his defense points. Step two, either wear down his attack points or try to go for a coup de grace and really take him out. Now, in addition to that, we have the psionic blast against non-psionic creatures. This is what you're going to use if, let's say, you're fighting an archdevil, and and in the description it says he has psionic blast, or if you're fighting like a mind flayer or something like that. This is where a psionic creature can attack a non-psionic creature. Um, and this is why in Adventures Dark and Deep, I included my own version of this. Because if you don't allow for this, even if you're not playing psionics, if you don't allow for this possibility here, you are robbing monsters of an attack form, and you should be taking away some of their XP value. Because this is calculated as part of their XP, is that they have these psionic disciplines. They can do a psionic blast. So I call it the psychic strike. Um, in Adventures Dark and Deep, and I put it in there. They can do this, and there's a rule for it, that pretty much mirrors this. But basically, what you do here is if I'm a psionic creature or character, I've got 100 points, attack points or more. I'm going to try to psionic blast some fighter or cleric or whatever. Then you add up their intelligence and wisdom. If it's a monster and they don't have a wisdom score, there's a way to calculate it. That's in there. It's basically depending on the intelligence of the monster. It gives you a nice range to figure out their thing, or you could just double the intelligence. Either one would work. There's some saving throw adjustments, but basically, what you're doing here is you figure out what their wisdom and intelligence is together. So let's say they're about 30 total, right? And depending on the range, they get a saving throw. It's either a 6 or a 5 or a 4. You want to obviously roll high, and then if it's successful, you roll to see what the effect is. So you go down to this table. So we're back on that 30 to 33 because that's the thing. And you roll percentile dice. On a roll of 1, he's enraged. On a roll of 2 to 15, he panics. On a roll of 16 to 90, he's feeble-minded. That you can develop permanent insanity, and they can do temporary insanity. Right. So boom, that's um, uh, the psychic strike, the psionic blast for the against a non-psionic creature. But the important thing to remember if you're designing stuff, even if you're not playing with this, you should probably include this in the repertoire of the monster, because if you're not, then you should be taking away XP, because this is a valid attack form that's written into the rules, and the XP calculations are based upon this. So that is, in a nutshell, how psionic versus non-psionic combat works. And that's it in a nutshell. I mean, obviously, I glossed over a lot of things. There's a lot of modifiers and stuff like that, but that's the basics of it, right? You've got those disciplines. You roll for them when you create your character. Some of them can be really, really powerful, and there's really no downside to it, right? You're spending your psionic points, and you can use these disciplines. Then there is psionic versus psionic combat, which is the vast majority of psionic combat you're going to see. You have to, you pick an attack form, he picks a defense form, and you reduce his defense points. Once one, and then he's doing the same thing to you simultaneously. That happens in a segment by segment, and then once one or both of you, is down to 0 defense points, you go onto that second table, and you either start attacking his attack points, or you try to go for something special, like trying to make him feeble-minded or go into a coma or kill him or whatever. That's that. Then you've got the third factor, which is psionic versus non-psionic. That is that psychic blast thing, psionic blast, which you can use against any creature. And and again, there's saving throw modifiers, but basically you're forcing him to make a saving throw, and if he fails, you roll for the effect. That's it in a nutshell. And yeah, there's a bunch of tables, but hey, it's AD&D. There's going to be tables. That's just how that works. But it's but you can see in general how it really kind of just it feels very bolted on because it is really bolted on. There's really no inherent need for it. When in a world where you have magic, why do you need this other thing that looks just like magic? If you wanted to make a like a magical dueling um, uh, uh, system that kind of mimicked that psionic versus psionic combat thing, that you could absolutely do. Um, that wouldn't be too hard to work out. If you're it would actually give you a reason to have um, a uh, a high intelligence. Is if you want to counter somebody's spell, and then you go into that segment by segment system, and and there could be effects at the end of it. I could see that being good, and it would feel organic to the game because it's magic users versus magic users, or illusionists or savants or whatever. But in terms of a fantasy game like D&D, I personally don't see the need for it. I would love to see something like this in like a Gamma World or Metamorphosis Alpha. So that's where it belongs properly. Is where you have all kinds of weird creatures, and they have their own psychic uh, rules in those games. This is just a little different and jazzed up a little. But in terms of this, I would normally see this as just another magic system that works entirely differently than the existing magic system. And why do we need that? If you were going to do it, I would probably go with some of the recommendations from the original in Eldritch Wizardry, where fighters start to lose strength points because they're relying on their mind so much, and they lose followers and things like that. And magic users lose spell slots as they gain more disciplines and so forth. And I wouldn't, and I'd probably key them to going up in levels and so forth. If I absolutely had to do it. But in terms of this, I don't particularly like it. I don't feel like it fits well with the game. You can see that it's clunky and in some places counterintuitive, and you can also see, I hope, in how it would unbalance a game, depending on what disciplines were rolled. You know, um, if you wanted to use it, I mean, it does give you an excuse to use things like um, uh, 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 a lot of the Sue monsters, and things that are psionically geared, intellect devourers and that kind of thing. It gives you an excuse to use those things to their fullest extent, their fullest powers. It adds some uh, it had some ferocity to demons and devils and so forth who have psychic, psionic powers and so forth, deities and such. But on the whole, honestly, the game works really well without it. 99% of the games I've seen don't use psionics. I know they did a complete overhaul of the psionic system in second edition, and it's been kind of a staple ever since. It's a lot of times it's relegated to a class, so in essence, you're having another kind of magic using class that happens to be mentally based. Um, okay, fine. If you need that, you need that, I guess. But again, that's introducing a second parallel magic system in a game that already has a magic system. So I don't really see the utility of it, even in that sense. But hey, if you like it, then be my guest. Feel free. So anyway, that's my take on how psionics works. If I screwed something up, and it's entirely possible because I haven't really played with psionics in many, many years, please let me know in the comments. And I would love to hear your thoughts on psionics too. Do you use them in your game? Does your assessment agree with mine? Has anybody used the Eldritch Wizardry psionics rules? Because if so, please let me know, because they seem a lot more arcane than even the AD&D rules were. So please do let me know in the comments, and I hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will talk to you all later.
Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.